I think setting is incredibly important because we have certain expectations as an audience, both visually and emotionally, that are evoked by certain settings. I mean, the fact that you see me here sitting in front of magnificently full bookshelves, you're getting the subliminal message that I am well read, even though these aren't my books. And so you can take the same conversation and put it in the middle of an empty town in the center of an empty street, and it's one conversation. The exact same words said on a street corner in New York becomes a completely different conversation. And in the past couple of years, in television in particular, we're getting the note more and more often, make the city a character. And the first time I got that note, I thought, really? Somebody's supposed to walk up in a trench coat and say, I'm New York. But I started to think about it, and when you pick a city, when you pick an area of a city for a TV show, it's not just, is this going to be visually interesting? You're saying, these are the people, and this is why they have chosen to live here or work here or try to get out of here. And the city and its bliss and its tragedy and how hard or easy it is to get through a day there inform your characters.
There's so many settings that jump to mind, but one in particular is Francis Coppola's Apocalypse Now, and the way he used, and John Milius used, Cambodia. They sort of transposed Conrad's Heart of Darkness from the Congo and Africa into a Vietnam story going into neutral Cambodia. And what's so interesting about that story, and I think not only the set but the sound design as well, all create this mood and this atmosphere as we leave civilization at the opening. We're in a hotel, and a motel probably, a motel room in Saigon. We go, from there to the mouth of the river of, that we're going to take into the Heart of Darkness. We meet the guy who loves the smell of napalm in the morning.
Smells like victory.
And he takes Willard and this, ragtag group of Sam Bottoms and Albert Hall. I think their names are Chief and Chef and Mr. Clean, and he takes them into, the deep Cambodian jungle to find Kurtz. And as you get deeper and deeper, the setting changes, but it gets more wild, more savage, culminating in finding Kurtz after we've seen the slaughter of a water buffalo and heads on stakes, and we enter, Kurtz's, this cave-like, savage, wild, other world of Kurtz's, where he's ensconced himself. And by the time you get to the end of the movie and his dialogue of the horror, you have seen it in the setting. The setting has reflected that and communicated that to you visually.
My setting is in film rarely realistic. It is typically a mythological landscape against which the characters are set and in which they live. And as the landscape changes, or as the characters change, so does the landscape. And you can see that from German Expressionism to Western, from film noir to samurai films. And I would like to highlight the Western because the landscape in the Western, a John Ford Western, is almost the main character. And in particular, talking about moral choices and the idea of American values. So a typical John Ford Western, may that be Stagecoach or revisionist Western like The Searchers, will use the landscape in very specific ways. And John Ford was known for his inside-out side shots. So oftentimes the camera is set inside, in the ranch house, in the church, in the building, and the building is dark, confining, but safe. And it represents civilization, law, order, and justice for all. And the outside is with a John Ford film at least, the breathtaking, monumental Monument Valley, God's country, the utopia of a higher aspiration to start anew at the frontier, a new Eden where everything is possible, a better life and unlimited personal freedom. So this dichotomy, inside law, order and justice for all, and outside unlimited personal freedom, are the pillars of American ideology, at least in its utopian ideal. And within one shot, it combines both. It lets you have your cake and eat it too. In reality, we always have to renegotiate. Where my law and order starts, someone else's personal freedom stops, and vice versa. That line has to be renegotiated. In a John Ford film, John Wayne typically, but also other characters, stand perched right on the sill between the inside and the outside. And then in some films where there's more reconciliation, the characters come inside. But in a Western like The Searchers, a revisionist Western, John Wayne stands awkwardly with his gesture of holding his arm, not quite sure if he can go inside, but he has been too much of a frontiersman to subsume himself and to give up the element of personal freedom that would be required to live within law, order, and justice for all the structures of civilization.
Originally, when John Hughes wrote The Breakfast Club, he intended it to be his directorial debut. That's why he set it in a single space, so it would be easier for him to film. And what better academic setting than the library? These teenagers are surrounded by information, and they have every opportunity to learn. But they don't. They just are so stuck in their social circles that society has placed them in, that once they really get to know each other and they learn from each other, then they can see past the simple archetypes and see that they're real human beings.
One movie that I think does an actually really excellent job of that right from the very beginning is The Graduate. And that film is written by Buck Henry and Calder Willingham. At the very beginning, the credits are still rolling, and so we have our lead actor, Dustin Hoffman. He is leaving the airport, and he basically steps onto a conveyor belt to exit the building. And it's amazing. It's just one single shot where Dustin Hoffman, it's his profile, and he stands in one place, and he doesn't move. He doesn't look to anything, he doesn't talk to anyone, he doesn't interact or engage with anything that's going on around him. He's very still, and right behind him there's this white wall that's just very confining and closed in, one-dimensional, all the same color, very muted. I think it's wonderful because without a single word of dialogue, in this one shot, you can learn so much about your character, that he's literally coasting through life, and he's not taking an active role in the things that are going on around him. He's not engaging, and it's just a wonderful way where you can communicate so much in such a tiny little space because of the way the scene was written for setting. And so that's definitely something that I want to learn to incorporate into my own scripts, so that when I'm writing my own stories, that I can take that same attention to detail and make sure that with a single shot, you learn so much more about the character.
The wonderful thing about setting is that it's all about creating a world, and a world that you can have fun in, and a world that's going to mean something to the audience. And in Pixar's Toy Story, that world is a child's bedroom, where toys come to life when the kids aren't there. And I think that it's obvious that the creators had a lot of fun making up, well, who's going to be in charge of all of the toys. Well, it should be a head toy, and that head toy should be a sheriff. It's important for the story to have that community set in place for us as an audience to invest in Woody and his story and know what he's losing when Buzz comes in, and all of a sudden Woody's position as the top dog and beloved community member is threatened. We empathize with him and we know exactly what he's losing by not being Andy's best toy anymore.
The whole issue of setting, some people think that it's just the nice pretty trees and the landscape outside, but I think of it as the world that the story is grounded in. And you must take your readers or viewers into a fresh world. Or if you think it's a world you've seen before, you need to show the audience something about that world or observe it with such detail that they feel like they're seeing it, you know, all over again with fresh eyes. In a film like Breakdown, with Kurt Russell when he's with his wife and he's driving through the Utah desert and he breaks down. The entire story takes place in that. The setting defines a lot of the obstacles of that story. So depending on the nature of the story, depending on the tone and the genre of the story, setting can completely define or help shape plot, help shape the nature of the obstacles that the hero or heroine have to overcome.
One of my favorite films that certainly uses the setting in a very important way is Lawrence of Arabia, in which the director David Lean, I think maybe for the first time, showed on screen the expanse of the setting that he was using, which was the desert. And panoramas and vistas that had never been seen on screen before. And not what I like about it is that it's not just background. It certainly represents the vastness of the setting that they're in. But each opening, a lot of the opening shots that he uses with the characters start out as little dots on this vast expanse, showing how small the actual human characters in this drama are as compared to the surroundings and the world around them. So he does bring in that theme, which is more than a beauty shot, that really you're kind of helpless in all of this and you're kind of powerless, which ties in with the film itself, who the main character Lawrence, who was an egomaniac and thought he was so powerful, and he set out to change the war and to lead the Arabs to victory, and by the end of the film he realizes that he was completely powerless, that he really didn't do anything at all. And it really brought, which was a character that was larger than life, that the myth that had been built up by the press and all his PR was absolutely, and he realized it at the end, was absolutely nothing.
So I took Harold and Maude, an iconic classic of the Hollywood Renaissance period. This is a very dark, almost black romantic comedy. The typical way you would start the scene is you would usually start with an establishing shot and then you'd move in. But the writer and Hal Ashby, the director, start the other way. They start on the close-up of the feet, and gradually you have this long tracking shot as Harold descends these lovely dark, but very dark wooden stairway, and then he moves in a almost somnambulistic way and does certain ritual functions, lighting the candles and these very heavy, ornate, obviously very posh room, and you get a sense of the the settings and decorations and everything in this place, and then you still only see Harold's feet, and then with the candles you get a slight view of his face, but in shadow. So this place, this Tony mansion, really is shot. It's dimly lit, and it's shot like a horror film. So it looks almost like a mausoleum or a museum. It's very, done as a very stuffy place. And again, the camera language has Harold very cut off. You see bits of him. You don't see the whole figure, and you don't see Harold in the whole room. You hold off. And then finally, he puts this very ornate brocaded chair down and steps on it. And the camera moves with his feet. And you see that, and then boom, he kicks the chair out, and he's hanging himself. And we're thinking, oh my God, we're in a horror film, or we're in a suspense film or something. Well, then the door opens and in comes his mother, all right? And she looks up and immediately sits down and calls her hairdresser. And we realize, that this is a common pattern in Harold's life, and that his mother is very used to this and also very annoyed and extremely narcissistic, I have to say. And so we flip the genre. We set up and we shoot this mansion in the setting as a horror film or suspense picture, and now we realize we're in a comedy. And she turns to Harold after she calls her hairdresser and says,
"Dinner at 8, Harold. And do try and be a little more vivacious."
and the last setting that we see, he has taken his car, which he's decorated as a hearse. We see that drive off the cliff, and then the camera pulls back, and there he is on the cliff. And he's given up that sense of playing at death. And he has the musical instrument, the banjo, that Maud gave him. And he's no longer listening to somebody else make music. He's making music himself, and he's moving on with his life. And you see the journey that Harold has undergone, and the setting is like a character itself. It really becomes very important that way.